My name is Adrian O'Dell, and I am here today in Brandon, just on the border of Norfolk and Suffolk, to talk to Richard and Regina Palik about their story. First of all, Richard, I wonder if you could tell me your full name and when you were born.
Richard Palik, 19th of the 7th, 47.
And sitting beside you is your mother, Regina. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Would you please be able to tell us when you were born and where you were born?
I born
1929?
Yeah, in July,
And where were you born?
in Poland,
And
Alexandria.
and I think that was in Ukraine when you
Now
were born.
it's Ukraine, but
Now
before
it's
was
Ukraine.
Poland.
Before was Poland. And Richard, your mother is still alive and looking very well, and you also had a Polish father.
Yes.
Tell me about him and his name and when he was born and where he was born.
Name was Joseph Palik. He was born in 1922 in a big town in Poland called Sosnowiec.
And I understand that he, when he was quite young, he joined the German army.
He didn't have no choice. His father was born in Germany, and he got dragged off to Germany to work on a farm for a year, 18 months, and then he was thrown into the German army and sent out to the Russian front.
So when would that have been?
1941.
1941. And Regina, if I may call you Regina, what was your story of your early life? You were born in Poland, but then I think you were taken to Siberia.
Yes,
When was that?
it's about 39, 40.
And tell me about, do you remember that?
A little, just a little.
And was it very difficult times?
Very difficult, was hungry, nothing to eat, everything.
And were you there with your family?
Yes,
Your mother and father?
and my brother.
Your mother, father and brother.
Mm.
And how long did you stay in Siberia?
About 2 years, I think. About 2 years.
2 years. And roughly what date would that have been? Do you know, Richard?
It's about 1942.
And what happened? You were able to escape, or you left Siberia?
I left Siberia because, they release us, but we have our own transport too. We have to have own. So we build the raft, and on the raft we go to Uzbekistan.
Yeah, they was released part of a land lease deal where Britain and America supplied Russia with armaments, tanks and whatnot, and they let all the Polish people go.
General Sikorski and others.
Yeah.
And where did she go to?
Well, they built these rafts, got on the rafts, and there was thousands of miles down the rivers right through Siberia into Russia, and then when they had to get off the rafts and that, and by the way, anybody who died on the raft, they was just pushed into the river, and there was a lot of children and elderly people couldn't stand it, and then they had to march 2,000-3,000 miles.
And were you frightened by all this?
Of course, yeah.
And you walked from Siberia to where? Through Uzbekistan?
Yes.
And where did you finally end up?
This we informed the Polish army there, and then we have to go
In Persia.
to Persia, Iran now.
And how long were you in Persia?
Oh, 3 or 4 years.
So that would have been, what sort of date would that have been?
That would be about 1940.
44 or something.
44, 45.
44.
And I understand that you also spent some time in Lebanon.
Yes, then we go from Persia, we go to Lebanon.
Why, to go to a port, to get to the sea?
No, they took us somehow, I don't know. I don't remember.
And I think that is when you met your future husband.
No. I met him in Lebanon. Yes, in Lebanon, but not straight away. Later, when I was already a few years there.
Oh, you spent a few years in
Yeah,
Lebanon.
he came from holiday and we met.
19,
From
no,
Egypt. He came from Egypt because it was his Polish army in Egypt. He was.
1946.
And I expect that life was much better in Lebanon than it had been in Siberia.
It's very nice.
Like a paradise.
Yes.
Well, she told me that was the best time of her life.
Really?
Meeting my father and being in Beirut. Because Beirut was like the Vegas.
But what happened to your father, Youssef, then? Did he leave Beirut?
Yes,
No,
because
he-
he was in the army.
And where
So
did
he had
he
to go
go-
back to Egypt.
He went back to
He
Egypt.
been only for holiday there. For a few weeks he been.
Oh,
And then he come after 3 months he come and we married.
that's very lucky.
Yeah.
And so he went then back to Alexandria.
No, I don't know if it was Alexandria.
No, he was different place. I don't remember.
He wasn't actually in Alexandria's a port, but he was with the British Army. The Polish Army, but it was under the British.
Yes. And so how did he then come to Britain?
When the army was sent back to Britain, they pulled out of Palestine, pulled up, and they all came back
Egypt.
to Brandon. I don't know, you saw the posters of the trains coming in, all soldiers. I suppose he came in on one of them transports.
So that would have been about
47.
1947.
And
And you were married in Beirut, though.
yeah.
Yes, but you then took a ship with your son
Yeah.
Richard
Yes.
and went via Alexandria in Egypt.
I've been in Egypt somewhere in the camp somewhere still 2 weeks I think, and then we go to Alexandria.
And then
But my husband already went to England. He was already in England.
and you knew that he had gone to England,
Yeah, yes.
so that you then decided that you would
Go.
follow him to England.
Yes.
And was that your own choice?
No, it's not choice. No. Stay in Lebanon. Not there.
Well, no, it's,
I can't stay in Lebanon.
they were part of the army then, weren't they? Married.
Ah.
All the couples, they were just said, you've got to go. They couldn't stay there
It's not
because they
my-
married to British or British soldiers, and they got their marching orders.
And I suppose you were very happy to be leaving there because you were going to join your husband again
Yeah, but the weather was not very nice.
in Britain.
They left the beautiful sunny weather and came back to one of the coldest winters on record.
But I couldn't stay there really because we have to go.
So with Richard and you both went through the Mediterranean.
Yeah, on the ship.
And where did the ship come into England?
Liverpool,
Into Liverpool. And you were, of course, too young to remember
5
that.
months old.
Yeah. And then you were sent also to Brandon.
Yeah. Because my husband already was in Brandon.
Stationed here in Brandon.
Yes. And he's still in the army.
No, he was
No,
already.
he's-
Well, he'd been demobbed.
Demobbed.
Demobbed in 1947, I think, yes.
Yeah, that's everything happened.
And what sort of house did you live? Where did you live in Brandon?
Missing huts, the old missing huts. And
There
to
we go.
start with, there's over 3,000 soldiers here. Most of the barracks were divided in like 3 families. They had a bit of rope from one end to the other with blankets hanging out to separate the families.
It was very hard. but we
With
got
one
there.
big pot-bellied stove right in the middle, heating the whole barrack. And that was only just thin tin.
So, inside the Nissen hut? How was that? Was it just one big room, or
They were one big room, but they were divided with string and blankets hanging on to divide the
oh,
people's
so there were
homes.
several families
Yeah,
in each
2,
house
3 families in each barrack.
with children?
No,
and,
we
yeah.
have.
We was lucky. We was 2 families in one.
Yeah.
and how did you feel happy in that situation?
Cold.
Cold. Nothing for no nappies, no nothing like we have now. Everything, terrible was. No cool, no cold in this house was, they were so cold.
So did you think, oh, when the war is over, perhaps I'll
No, we stay.
Well, the war was over then, of
We
course.
always think that we come back to Poland.
You wanted to go back to Poland?
No, not on this time, but we think always was thinking that we go back to Poland.
Yeah, but there was no chance. If they'd gone back to Poland, my dad would have been executed straight away for being in the German army in Stalingrad. So.
No, not in German, but in Polish as well. General Anders, so.
We talked about Yusuf, your husband and your father, earlier. Now, he was in the German army, and I understand then he was sent to Russia. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about that?
Well, first was the Caucasus, fighting there, and then they went to Stalingrad. And he was wounded in Stalingrad, where he won the Iron Cross. Excuse me.
With the German army.
With the German army, yeah. And he was flown out on the last flight at Stalingrad under General Paulus's orders for his bravery. They were flown to the island of Rhodes, where they had a prisoner of war camp and a military hospital.
Mm-hmm. And how long was he in Rhodes?
I couldn't honestly tell you.
Was he recovering in hospital?
He was recovering, yeah, because he was wounded.
And then presumably moved on to Beirut.
No. He managed to get a boat with an English captain, pilot, and a seaman. And they went out on the boat on the Mediterranean, were picked up by a British sub and taken to Egypt, where he joined the Polish army.
So he arrived by submarine into Alexandria.
I don't know, as Alexandria or Cairo might be. I don't honestly know where.
And so how long did he remain there?
Until 47.
Until
the end of the war, yeah.
And that's when
he came back here.
It's an amazing story, isn't it? And it was there were thousands of other Poles around you doing the same sort of thing, I suppose. And when you came to Brandon, and what sort of work did you do? Well, first of all, you had a family, of course.
Yeah, then I was working in the MCAR.
In MCAR, what
machinist?
Clothing factory.
And where was that? In Brandon?
Yes.
Brandon, yeah.
And what did you do? What you were
sewing.
Sewing what? Clothes?
To Mark Spencer.
Marks and Spencer's clothes.
Yeah.
And had you been a seamstress before? Were you able to do that before the war?
Yes.
You learned to do that in Poland or
in Poland. Poland, I was only 10 years old. In Iran and in Lebanon, I was learning these things.
At school.
Because we have Polish school there. A lot of Polish children without parents, without one body.
Mm-hmm. And how was your English when you first came to Britain?
No, I was learning a little, but was very bad.
You didn't learn English, of course, at school?
Yes.
Oh, you did? At your junior school?
No, this was in Lebanon.
Gymnasium, how you
call
it? Gymnasium.
A grammar school.
No grammar, not really grammar, because it's just like
senior school.
Sewing or something, so it's different. I learned everything, English, a little math, everything there.
And what about Yusuf, your husband? How was his English?
No, he was learning quick because he was very clever. He learned, when he came to England, he learned ever so quick.
He learned about 7 languages.
Really?
Yeah.
Which
he took GCSEs in
No, he German, he speak good German, Polish, Russian,
Italian, French.
Really?
Yeah. He go evening classes sometimes and improve a little.
Here in Brandon?
No, he go to Bury.
To Bury St Edmunds.
Brandon was nothing before, really.
No, small little town.
Yeah.
Just a county primary school.
And what was his work?
He was supervisor, press.
On the commercial press in the clothing factory.
Yeah, but before that, I think he
worked
as
in the wood yard, lumberjack wood yard and that sort of thing.
Literally cutting trees down?
No, he was working on the machine, on the saw, bench saws and that, where they used to saw all the wood.
And how did you then, after the war, feel about staying in Britain? Did you always want to go back to Poland?
Yes.
And why didn't you?
No, because Poland wasn't free. Russian was there, so.
And then the communists.
Yeah.
He'd have been executed straight away. like a lot of his friends that went
We
back, they
always thinking
disappeared.
when will be changed, so we go back.
And so you decided to stay, but have you been back to Poland?
Yeah, I've been for holiday.
And how many times since you came here? Quite
Oh,
regularly?
long time we don't come. Well, what year we go?
I don't
First
know.
time.
First time I went was
Nearly
98.
was, this free. Well, George, when we went to Poland.
When Iron Curtain came down.
80 something.
Yeah. Well, that was after that.
So we go once.
I went first time in 98.
And
And it wasn't nothing what I thought it would be like.
what did you think it was going to be like?
From what I knew, it was just mountains and forests and bitterly cold.
Poland is beautiful.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't know then, Mum.
And you've learned some Polish.
Yes, I have a Polish wife of, what's the day, 20, in 4 days' time will be 19 years.
Right. We also have George sitting in on the conversation. He's been very quiet so far. What was it like, George, being the son of Polish people?
Well, had a hard time being called all sorts of names, but you just took it and got on with life.
What sort of names did they call you?
Not repeatable.
Be Poles and all sorts. I mean, but it wasn't racist. It's just if you upset somebody, they picked the first thing they could, which was a be Pole or whatever.
And Regina, did you feel at home here after the war?
Not really.
And did you
No,
feel
now more, but
did you feel you were welcome here, or did you feel that there were so many Poles, people didn't like that? What do you remember that at all?
No, it was all right, really. No,
Yeah, it's
it was all right.
no problems in that way.
No
There
problem.
was a bit of animosity because the Poles worked hard. The ones that worked on the forestry, they were all piecework. Where an English worker cut down one tree a day, a Pole would do 2 free trees at the same time.
The same.
They made money, they got richer, they were better off, and majority of them, they did like a good drink, but they saved their money and moved on.
The same factory when we were Stoic, so Polish guys, few worked there, maybe about 10 of us was working in this factory. So we earned the most more money.
that's
a
known as
lot of
piecework.
money.
And so were the
Because we
British
were guard.
were the
We were
British workers a little bit jealous then, perhaps?
Yes, I
maybe.
think that's a lot of it. Yeah.
Because
And of
we-
course they used to talk at home and we used to get at school from their children.
Yes.
Because they'd be talking about the Poles doing this and the Poles doing that. How come he's just bought a new motorbike? How come he's bought a new car? We can't afford this. Of course, the kids would come at school and take it out on us.
But we didn't really have that.
No, it wasn't that
problem.
bad.
It wasn't that bad.
We had a lot of good English friends.
Yeah. Most of them were okay.
So, do you still maintain your Polish traditions, the family traditions?
Some of them.
What-
Vigilia, Christmas Eve.
No, it's
We have like the Christmas dinner, Christmas Eve
Yes.
sort of thing. And Easter Sunday, we have we don't have a lunch or dinner, we have a big breakfast.
And do you still do any Polish cooking?
No, since last Christmas when I was getting ill, so I do nothing now.
But up till now, she's always done
Yeah.
something.
Last Christmas I finished with everything because I wasn't well.
November till January, February, she was in hospital about 4 times.
Yeah.
In and out of hospital. She's very poorly. We thought we was going to lose you, didn't we?
And you have to suffer still.
You look very strong now, and Polish people are very strong people. Well, it's been a fascinating story. I know there's far more to hear, but we are a little bit limited on time. So I'd like to thank you all, the Palik family, that's Regina, and Richard and George, for talking to the Norfolk Polish Heritage Group today as part of our special archive project.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.